29-year-old Joshua Michael Rosebush was accused of committing 26 crimes in Saginaw Township, Michigan, while absconding from parole in January of 2019. Rosebush, who had a long criminal history, had been wearing state-ordered tethers on his ankles, which he cut off on January the 3rd. He subsequently stole a vehicle on Maple Street, which police found abandoned hours later. Early on the morning of January the 22nd, police officer Jeff Koenig observed a Ford pickup truck with no headlights and conducted a traffic stop. Unbeknownst to the 48-year-old officer, Rosebush was behind the wheel. As Koenig approached the driver's side window, he reportedly heard the motorist say, "Nighty night," before 2 shots were fired from a .38 caliber pistol. The officer suffered gunshot wounds to the jaw and right arm. Rosebush fled the scene, dumped the vehicle, and then stole another one at the Speedway gas station on Bristol Road in the city of Burton. Shortly after 1 p.m., Rosebush was spotted around Woodbury and Lansing Roads in Shiawassee County. During an ensuing car chase, he fired at the police, prompting them to return fire. Rosebush sustained gunshot wounds and was eventually apprehended. He was then transported to a hospital for treatment. On October the 4th of 2019, a jury found Rosebush guilty of several crimes, including assault with intent to murder, vehicle theft, using a firearm during a felony, and other charges. On November the 27th, he was sentenced to a minimum of 75 years and a maximum of 115 years behind bars. Rosebush wasn't given credit for the time he'd already served. Additionally, he was ordered to pay $1,253.44 in restitution. Number 8. Lance Stores. On the evening of June the 30th of 2022, 3 Kentucky police officers were killed in a shootout at the home of a man whom authorities referred to as an extremist on a mission. Deputies showed up at the residence in rural Prestonsburg with a warrant for Lance Stores' arrest in connection with a domestic violence incident. Before deputies made contact with Stores, the 49-year-old barricaded himself inside the home with his wife and daughter. Subsequently, the suspect opened fire on the deputies. According to the Floyd County Sheriff, it took several hours to figure out where the gunman was firing from. The deputies called for backup, and several agencies responded to the scene. In the aftermath of a 5-hour standoff, Prestonsburg Police Captain Ralph Frazier, Deputy William Petrie, and canine handler Jacob Chaffins, along with a sheriff's canine named Drago, succumbed to gunshot wounds inflicted by shots fired from Stores' rifle. Several other officers were wounded and taken to local hospitals for treatment. Stores was taken into custody while his family was fortunately left unharmed. He was accused of murder, attempted murder, wanton endangerment, domestic violence, assault, and assault on a service animal. In August, he pleaded not guilty to each of the charges. Nearly 7 months later, the man was found dead in a shower stall at the Pike County Detention Center. Number 7. Markeith Lloyd. In December of 2016, a physical altercation in Orlando, Florida, devolved into a fatal shooting, eventually giving way to a month-long manhunt for the individual responsible. On the night of December the 13th, 41-year-old Markeith Lloyd, a convicted felon, got into an argument with Sade Dixon outside her home on Long Peak Drive. The 24-year-old was identified as Lloyd's ex-girlfriend and was reportedly pregnant with his child. In the aftermath of the heated confrontation, Lloyd shot Dixon and her brother, who rushed to her aid. According to Orange County deputies, Lloyd fled the scene while Dixon ultimately died. Shortly after 7 a.m. on January the 9th, Orlando police officer Deborah Clayton spotted Lloyd in a Walmart parking lot on Princeton Street. When Officer Clayton approached Lloyd, the man attempted to flee. Upon realizing he couldn't get around Clayton, however, the suspect opened fire, hitting the officer several times before leaving the scene. Days later, on January the 17th, Lloyd was located at a house on Lescott Lane, where he'd been hiding out. He reportedly crawled out of the residence covered in body armor and armed with 2 guns. It took 6 officers to subdue him and put him in handcuffs. During the course of his arrest, he sustained blows that ultimately caused him to lose his left eye and also suffered multiple lacerations. A state attorney deemed the use of force in Lloyd's arrest justified because officers believed he might have been armed. After being treated at a hospital, Lloyd was taken to the Orange County Jail. He was found guilty of the first-degree murder of Sade Dixon and the unborn baby in October of 2019 and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. In November of 2021, Lloyd was convicted of Clayton's murder, along with aggravated assault and carjacking. 4 months later, he was sentenced to death. Number 6. Emily Petranella. A shooting broke out while a police tactical team attempted to serve a search warrant at a residence in the Humboldt Park neighborhood of Chicago on March the 9th of 2019. ABC News reported that 19-year-old Emily Petranella had been free on a $10,000 bond stemming from charges of unlawful use of a weapon. Petranella was suspected of having narcotics and illegal weapons at the home at the time of the incident. Shortly after 7 p.m. when police arrived, she thought burglars were attempting to break in, so she fired through the rear door of her home, according to her attorney. Officers didn't return fire, but one of them sustained a gunshot wound. The injured officer was taken to Stroger Hospital, where he was considered to be in stable condition. Police ultimately seized more than 11 pounds of marijuana, a semi-automatic pistol, and bundles of cash from the home. Petranella was held without bail and accused of a slew of charges, including attempted murder and aggravated assault on a peace officer. Subsequent information indicated that her bail was set at $150,000. She was released and required to wear an electronic monitoring device while awaiting trial. Number 5. Sergio Francisco Rodriguez. A Honduran man pulled the trigger on a policewoman during a routine traffic stop in Stafford, Texas at about 3 a.m. on October the 26th of 2013. 40-year-old officer Anne-Marie Carrizales approached the vehicle after stopping it on Murphy Road. The car had 3 male occupants who were allegedly in the midst of a crime spree at the time. As Carrizales spoke with the driver, one of the passengers shot her twice at point-blank range. One bullet hit her in the cheek while another hit her in the chest, but was stopped by the bulletproof vest she was wearing. The car subsequently sped off and Carrizales fired back, smashing the vehicle's rear window. What followed was a 20-mile hot pursuit by Carrizales and other law enforcement officers responding to her call for backup. Eventually, the shooter, identified as 21-year-old Sergio Francisco Rodriguez, was cornered in an apartment complex and arrested. Carrizales went to a local hospital and was released later that night. In June of 2014, the other 2 suspects, named as Daniel Cruz and Freddy Enriquez, were apprehended. Cruz and Enriquez, both in their 20s at the time, were later found guilty of aggravated assault on a peace officer. Cruz was sentenced to 14 years of incarceration, while Enriquez was handed a life sentence. On May the 22nd of 2017, Rodriguez pleaded guilty to the same charge in exchange for 50 years behind bars with eligibility for parole after 25 years. He apologized to Carrizales, saying, "I truly am sorry for having to try to kill her." Number 4. Thomas Kinworthy Jr. St. Louis police responded to the South Grand neighborhood near Tower Grove Park at around 6:30 p.m. on August the 29th of 2020. Police dispatch received reports of a man having allegedly opened fire in an alleyway. After officers Tamaris Bohannon and Orlando Bailey responded to the scene, they were shot by Thomas Kinworthy Jr., who barricaded himself inside a stranger's home. The ensuing standoff finally ended at around 5:30 the following morning, at which point the 43-year-old gunman was arrested. In the aftermath, Officer Bailey was treated for a leg wound, while Bohannon succumbed to a gunshot wound to the head. Kinworthy was held in the St. Louis City Justice Center charged with first-degree murder, 3 counts of armed criminal action, assault, burglary, resisted arrest and unlawful use of a firearm. Updates on his case indicated that he planned to rely on a mental health-centered defense during his trial. Number 3. John Williams. Maine resident John Williams was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of 61-year-old Somerset County Sheriff's Corporal Eugene Cole. On April the 25th of 2018, Cole was shot to death while trying to arrest 29-year-old Williams on drug charges in the town of Norwich Walk. The suspect then stole Cole's cruiser and went on the run. Shortly before 1 p.m. on April the 28th, Williams was captured near Lostbrook and Route 139. Cole's handcuffs were reportedly used in Williams' arrest. The man was subsequently booked into the Maine State Prison. 14 months later, He appeared in Cumberland County Superior Court, where a jury found him guilty of murder. During his sentencing on September the 12th of 2019, William expressed hope that he might eventually be forgiven by the community and the victim's family. Number 2. Jason Dane Brown. Indiana man Jason Dane Brown was charged in the shooting death of Southport Police Lieutenant Aaron Allen, which occurred on July the 27th of 2017. Brown flipped his car after driving erratically, crashing it near Madison Avenue and Maynard Drive. When Officer Allen went to help, Brown opened fire, mortally wounding him. Officers believed that Brown's violent reaction was unprovoked and that he was on drugs at the time of the incident. The Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department released Brown's mugshot, in which he appeared badly injured from the car crash. Nearly 5 years later, in February of 2022, he was found guilty of Allen's murder, as well as marijuana possession. He was later sentenced to a total of 58 years in prison, 3 of which were suspended. Number 1. David Anthony Weir. A vehicle driven by Oklahoma man David Anthony Weir was pulled over by 2 Tulsa police officers during the summer of 2020. The traffic stop took place in the 8900 block of East 21st Street on June the 29th. Weir, who was in his early 30s, was asked by Sergeant Craig Johnson and Officer Orash Zarkeshian to get out of his vehicle at least 12 times. He continually refused, so the officers deployed a taser. However, Weir wasn't subdued, so they doused him with pepper spray. When they managed to get Weir out of the car, he pulled out a gun and shot both Johnson and Zarkeshian multiple times. The officers went down, enabling Weir to flee the scene in a vehicle driven by Matthew Hall. The injured officers underwent surgery, but Sergeant Johnson passed away the following day. Zarkeshian would later improve and return to active duty. Hall and Weir were ultimately arrested. The former was found guilty of 2 counts of accessory to a felony and sentenced to 24 years in prison. Weir pleaded not guilty to first-degree murder, shooting with intent to kill, possession of a firearm after a felony conviction, possession of drugs, and obstructing an officer. A Tulsa jury later found him guilty on all charges, and in May of 2022, he was formally sentenced to death for Johnson's murder. He was also handed a life sentence in order to pay a total of $30,500 in connection with his other offenses. Weir's execution date was scheduled for August the 10th, but official records indicated that his representation had filed a notice of appeal. At about 2 a.m. on March the 11th of 2023, 2 uniformed NYPD officers were approached on the street by a broad-shouldered man. It was pouring rain on the Lower East Side of Manhattan when 26-year-old Shawnell Evans asked the on-duty cops who were posted up on Rivington Street if he could use their cell phone. At some point, the man became agitated and began striking the windows of a police cruiser. Although it wasn't immediately made clear what set Evans off, he became increasingly aggressive, punching the officers as they attempted to subdue him. As the scuffle was unfolding, a crowd of onlookers cheered the suspect on. The triumphant clamor of bystanders swelled when Evans eventually managed to free himself from the officer's grasp, as was shown in viral footage of the incident. The man pulled up his drooping pants and made a run for it, much to the delight of the crowd. One of the officers remained on the ground, clearly injured, but some of his colleagues caught up with the suspect at the corner of Rivington Street and Essex Street. He was taken into custody with a cut on his nose and blood splattered on his white shirt. Evans, a Connecticut resident, was booked into jail on charges of 2nd and 3rd degree assault, obstructing governmental administration, harassment, disorderly conduct, and criminal mischief. The man's mother told the New York Post that her son's behavior that night was wildly out of character, saying, "He's working, paying his bills, responsible. He's never had an issue, never been arrested. It was very sad to hear." Number 7. Lachey Whitaker and Tiara Brown. In the early hours of October the 1st of 2017, the manager of the 7-Eleven on Frankford Avenue in Philadelphia noticed a pair of women who'd been involved in an alleged shoplifting incident the previous night entered the store. 20-year-old Lachey Whitaker and Tiara Brown, aged 28, were promptly asked to leave, but they refused. As a result, they subsequently found themselves locked inside by store security while police made their way to the scene. As shown in cell phone footage, Whitaker kicked the front door as a staffer pointed pepper spray in her direction. At one point, One of the women grabbed a bottle of lighter fluid and poured it all over the store. She then threatened to burn the place down if they weren't allowed to leave. The suspect's destructive behavior wasn't done, however, as Whitaker also started tossing jugs of cleanser or automotive fluid around the floor and knocking merchandise off the shelves. Upon the arrival of a police officer, the door was unlocked to allow him to enter. He immediately called for backup as he was confronted by Whitaker and Brown. The former tried to walk out but was pushed back in by the officer, so she lunged at him. He subsequently struck her and wrestled her to the floor. The pair exchanged blows as Brown tried to intervene, but eventually both women were subdued and taken into custody. Whitaker was charged with attempted arson, causing a catastrophe and inciting a riot. Meanwhile, Brown faced charges of assault and reckless endangerment. Whitaker's legal representation alleged that law enforcement had used unnecessary force to restrain his client at the scene. Number 6. Simone Brier Kim. While a Frontier Airlines flight bound for Philadelphia waited to depart from the Miami International Airport on March the 21st of 2023, a heated argument erupted between two passengers on board. 24-year-old Simone Brier Kim, reportedly from Keelan, Texas, was caught on camera berating a male passenger after the two came head-to-head in the aisle as they boarded the plane. Kim threatened to beat the man up, saying, "If you're real, show me what's up." As another woman tried to intervene, the unruly passenger continued her profane diatribe, telling the man, "You're not even from Philly." At some point, a crew member stepped in to defuse the situation, but Kim was seemingly unable or unwilling to calm down. She was asked to leave the plane, but refused. Law enforcement was subsequently called, but when Miami-Dade police officers arrived to arrest the young woman, her disorderly behavior persisted. Kim was accused of pushing and pulling officers away as they attempted to remove her from the aircraft. In a police report, it was noted that she even tried to bite and kick the cops during the struggle. She was ultimately dragged off the plane and carried like a rag doll as she was placed in the back of a police car. Kim was charged with battery on a police officer, resisting an officer with violence, assault on an officer, and trespassing. She was released from custody after posting bail. Number 5. Damian Arce, Taisha Mullen, and Cantrell James Miller. On April the 17th of 2023, the police in El Paso, Texas, had officers patrolling Gateway Boulevard West, an area known to be high in criminal activity. Officers observed a white Hyundai in the parking lot of Jaguars Club and noticed a man and a woman inside the vehicle with the cab light turned on. When the Hyundai's occupants took note of the officers, they turned off the light and started making suspicious movements, as if they were attempting to hide something. Law enforcement approached the vehicle and immediately noticed a strong smell of marijuana. They also watched the two occupants stuff something into their pockets. One of the officers ordered the man behind the wheel to step out, at which point the suspect tried to put the car in gear. The officer grabbed the man by the shoulder and attempted to remove him by force, but was unsuccessful. The suspect managed to get the vehicle in drive and accelerated, dragging the officer along the pavement before colliding with the police unit. Following the crash, a cop entered the vehicle and started punching the driver in the face to get him to stop. The man nevertheless continued driving, crashing into multiple other cars in the process. Eventually, the Hyundai came to a full stop upon slamming into a pickup truck. The officer was able to pull the motorist out of the car and place him in handcuffs. While the female passenger was being detained, another man walked up to the scene and began shouting at the police. As detailed in an arrest affidavit, the individual subsequently got into his own car and drove towards the officers at high speed. One of the policemen drew his service weapon and fired it at the oncoming vehicle. The suspect ultimately stopped short of the officers and fled the scene. At that point, the woman tried to grab the officer, who leg swept her to the ground and arrested her. The occupants of the Hyundai were identified as 29-year-old Damian Arce and Taisha Mullen, aged 27. They were both charged with assault against a public servant and resisted arrest. The third suspect's vehicle was later found abandoned. A few days later, the man, 29-year-old Cantrell James Miller, was arrested after being stopped with narcotics. He reportedly faced the charge of aggravated assault against a public servant. Number 4. Gabriel Harris. Just after 3 a.m. on November the 16th of 2014, a blue-haired man and his female companion rode bicycles into the drive-through line at Taco Bell in New Smyrna Beach, Florida. The pair stopped at the menu speaker and attempted to place an order. However, they were refused service because they weren't inside a car. The man, identified as 33-year-old Gabriel Harris, subsequently tried to enter the restaurant along with the woman, who was named as Sarah Halliburton. The pair were sent away again as the establishment had closed only minutes earlier. Harris vowed not to leave until they received the food they'd ordered, so employees called the police. After Taco Bell staff brought law enforcement up to speed on the situation, the officers approached Harris, who was back on his bicycle, and asked him to vacate the premises. When an officer tried to confiscate the red Swiss Army knife latched onto Harris's belt loop, the suspect grabbed the policeman's wrist and twisted it. The two subsequently wrestled each other to the ground and Harris was swiftly handcuffed. He sustained a scrape on his forehead during the struggle, as shown in his booking photo, which also featured the man sporting an exaggerated frown. Harris was accused of resisting arrest with violence, while Halliburton wasn't charged in connection with the incident. Number 3. Clarella Nelson Potter. The police in Cape Coral, Florida, were called to the Fathoms restaurant and bar for a disturbance in progress on the evening of January the 24th of 2023. Upon arrival, law enforcement made contact with 81-year-old Clarella Nelson Potter, who was visibly intoxicated. The woman became combative with restaurant staff and refused to cooperate with the police as they attempted to track down a relative to take her home. In a rage, Potter grabbed the cop by the back of the neck and slapped away the officer's hands as they tried to escort her away from employees. The elderly woman refused to give police her identification and became belligerent, shouting obscenities across the restaurant. As she was subsequently being handcuffed, Potter allegedly kicked an officer in the groin with full force. During the ensuing car ride to jail, she said she was going to kill someone once her cuffs were removed. She was consequently charged with disorderly conduct, 3 counts of battery of a law enforcement officer, and intimidation in the form of threatening death or serious bodily harm. Number 2. Penelope Hernandez. 29-year-old Penelope Hernandez casually walked up the front steps of the NYPD's 52nd Precinct Station House before suddenly punching an officer in the face on the night of November the 30th of 2021. The incident was captured by surveillance footage, which showed the officer exiting the station in the moments leading up to the unprovoked strike. He immediately sprung into action to detain the woman following the ambush. A struggle ensued on the sidewalk as Hernandez squirmed to free herself. However, another officer eventually came on the scene to aid his colleague, as did a male bystander who witnessed the sucker punch. Hernandez was arrested and charged with assault on a police officer, resisting arrest, and obstructing government administration. The officer she struck was said to have sustained bruising and swelling to his face and an abrasion to his knee, but the injuries were in no way life-threatening. Number 1. Tawan Boyd. 21-year-old Tawan Boyd from Middle River, Maryland, dialed 911 during the early morning hours of September the 18th of 2016. Dispatchers reportedly heard the young man's girlfriend, LaToya Francis Williams, in the background. She stated that Boyd needed medical attention, but the caller himself didn't ask for medical aid. Instead, officers were sent to the residence located on Atkins Circle for what they believed was a domestic disturbance. Upon law enforcement's arrival, Boyd told them there was an intruder inside his house, which wasn't true, and appeared to be confused and paranoid. He accused his girlfriend of getting him intoxicated, while also saying he thought she was secretly recording him. In a police report, it was mentioned that Francis Williams told officers her boyfriend had been drinking and smoking marijuana, after which he started acting crazy. An ambulance was summoned and paramedics administered Boyd haloperidol, an antipsychotic drug used to calm agitated individuals. At some point, Boyd began pounding on a neighbor's front door, prompting the police to pull him away to prevent him from gaining entry. He also reportedly tried to enter several marked police cars. As his erratic behavior continued, he was ordered to lie down and put his hands behind his back. Boyd refused to comply, however, and instead started grabbing and kicking officers, allegedly injuring 3 of them. During the scuffle, one of the cops punched the suspect in the face twice, according to the police report. However, when he was finally restrained and brought to the hospital, his condition was dire. He spent the next 3 days receiving treatment before ultimately being pronounced dead. In the aftermath, Boyd's family publicly blamed Baltimore County Police and fire personnel for his death, alleging they'd used excessive force to subdue him at the scene. A few months later, around Christmas time, a medical examiner determined that Boyd's death was most likely related to drugs and officially ruled it an accident. The following year, the family filed a lawsuit against Baltimore County, seeking $10 million for wrongful death and violation of Boyd's constitutional rights. The plaintiffs relied on the testimony of other medical experts, some of whom reportedly claimed there was evidence that Boyd died of asphyxiation as a result of being severely beaten by police. In the end, the suit was settled for $1.1 million, which the family's attorney called fair and reasonable.
Number 7. Apprentice Robinson. North Carolina man Apprentice Robinson stopped at the Wingate police station on February the 26th of 2018 to file an official report that his cell phone had been stolen. Shortly after leaving the station, the 55-year-old, who was streaming his walk home on Facebook Live, was suddenly approached by an armed man. Robinson notified the individual positioned off camera that he was recording, repeatedly saying, "You on live." Nevertheless, the assailant proceeded to fire 4 gunshots, after which Robinson collapsed to the ground, along with the selfie stick he'd been using to record himself. The disturbing video clip was later removed from Facebook, which explained its decision in a public statement, stating that the company could never know if Robinson would have wanted this horrific act to be live streamed on his profile. As was later detailed by the Wingate police chief, the suspect had been wearing blue jeans, brown Timberland-style boots, and a black and blue windbreaker at the time of the deadly incident. The shooter was ultimately identified as 65-year-old Douglas Cleveland Colson, who turned himself into the authorities the following day. It subsequently emerged that Robinson had become well known in the community for his Facebook Live videos, which he'd used to highlight illicit neighborhood activities such as drug dealing. While the police didn't specify what they believed to be Colson's motive for the killing, it was theorized that members of Wingate's criminal element sought to eliminate Robinson because of his investigative social media videos. Number 6. Raheem Murray. Dramatic surveillance footage taken from the 4300 block of 3rd Street Southeast in Washington, D.C. captured 2 gunmen opening fire on a group of people that included a pair of young children. In the moments leading up to the shooting, the 2 kids hopped out of a vehicle and began approaching 3 men standing idly on the sidewalk. Shortly thereafter, the assailants emerged from a Honda sedan that had come to a screeching halt in front of the unsuspecting pedestrians. They fired multiple rifle shots into the crowd, prompting a bystander to swoop up the children and flee the scene on foot. The 3 men immediately fell to the ground after having sustained several non-fatal gunshot wounds. However, one of the victims, later identified as Raheem Murray, was ultimately killed after one of the gunmen had walked over to him and fired a single round into his head at point-blank range. Before fleeing in the Honda, detectives reviewed the video recording of the incident, which had occurred on Super Bowl Sunday 2020, for several months before they finally identified Murray's killer as 26-year-old Glenn Dolford. The latter was reported as having an extensive criminal record that included convictions on charges of assaulting a police officer, as well as weapons-related offenses. Subsequent reports indicated that Dolford was expected to be indicted on first-degree murder charges in early 2022. Number 5. Shawn Walker. In the evening hours of June the 27th of 2019, Ohio teen Shawn Walker was fatally shot several times at point-blank range at a home in the 400 block of East Avenue in Hamilton. The incident was caught on video, which investigators subsequently used to identify their prime suspect as 17-year-old Michael Smith Jr. Immediately following the shooting, Smith had allegedly concealed the murder weapon in his clothes before disposing of it in a nearby sewer. Upon being taken into custody in early July, he reportedly faced charges of murder with a gun specification and tampering with evidence. It emerged following Smith's arrest that despite his relatively young age, he'd already racked up a fairly extensive record in the juvenile court system. The accused teen had previously served 2 months in a detention center after being convicted of inducing panic, as well as 3 counts of assault. 3 years later, Smith was charged with aggravated menacing, for which he spent about a month behind bars. Then, less than a month prior to the murder, Smith had committed a probation violation, whereupon he was ordered to perform 12 hours of community service. In August of 2020, the teenager pled guilty to the charges levied against him in connection to Walker's brutal slaying, for which it was reported he'd be tried as an adult. Smith was ultimately sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 16 years. Number 4. Chesley Patterson. The police in Baltimore, Maryland, responded to the scene of a reported shooting in the early morning hours of January the 24th of 2022. Officers reportedly came upon a gunshot victim identified as 44-year-old Chesley Patterson at the intersection of Eastern Avenue and South Broadway in the neighborhood of Fells Point. The man was taken to Johns Hopkins Hospital, where he was ultimately pronounced dead. During the ensuing investigation, it was discovered that Patterson, the beloved manager at La Scala Ristorante Italiano in Little Italy, had just closed up shop and was on his way home when the shooting occurred. At approximately 1 a.m., the man had reportedly gone into a liquor store before emerging with items he'd purchased, which he then put into the trunk of his car. Upon getting back in the driver's seat, Patterson was accosted by a man who'd blocked his car into its parking spot with a gold minivan. Following a brief physical struggle, the assailant brandished a gun and fired a single round into Patterson before fleeing the scene. Homicide detectives used surveillance footage of the incident to identify Samuel Wise as the individual in the gold minivan, which he'd used during a Fells Point crime spree that involved 2 other robberies earlier that night. He was consequently taken into police custody on several charges, including first-degree murder, armed robbery, and assault. In the wake of his death, Patterson was honored by members of the Little Italy community, including the owner of La Scala Ristorante Italiano, who said that he was more than an employee, he was a family member. Number 3. Chad Reed. Shortly before 4:30 p.m. on November the 5th of 2021, the police in Lubbock, Texas, were dispatched to the 2100 block of 90th Street after receiving reports of a shooting on the premises. Upon their arrival, officers found a gunshot victim, identified as 54-year-old Chad Reed, in critical condition. The man ultimately passed away from his injuries. Following a preliminary homicide investigation, it was determined that Reed had been shot during an argument with William Kyle Carruth. The heated confrontation had reportedly stemmed from a custody dispute involving Reed's children and his ex-wife, whom Carruth was dating at the time. As tensions between the two men escalated, Carruth retrieved a firearm from inside his home, which he then used to gun Reed down on the front porch. Although the incident appeared to have simply been a domestic dispute turned violent, news of Reed's death ultimately made national headlines after his widow, Jennifer, publicly released a cell phone video clip of the shooting. The footage, which spread rapidly on social media, showed Reed and Carruth engaged in a contentious shouting match that culminated with the latter firing his weapon. The video appeared as though it had confirmed the findings of the police's investigation, and many subsequently called for Carruth to be charged with Reed's murder. However, shortly after Jennifer released her footage of the incident, Carruth's attorney released a video of the argument that had been taken from a different perspective. This alternate view of the shooting showed Reed getting into Carruth's face and appearing to threaten him. Jennifer eventually filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Carruth, accusing him and his girlfriend of conspiring to kill her late husband. Carruth denied the allegations, however, and claimed to have shot the man in self-defense. In March of 2022, a Lubbock County grand jury ultimately chose not to indict Carruth in connection to the fatal incident. Number 2. Xavier Antonio Johnson. In April of 2022, Florida man Xavier Antonio Johnson and his associates began renting out an Airbnb in St. Petersburg, which they allegedly used to run a marijuana trafficking operation. At about 8:30 p.m. on the 13th of the month, 2 armed individuals entered the house, purportedly to carry out a transaction of some kind with Johnson. However, a short time later, the property's Ring doorbell camera captured a trio of men carrying Johnson's lifeless body out the front door. They took the incapacitated man to a hospital in Davenport before fleeing, according to a statement made by the Polk County Sheriff. Johnson, having been shot by the men who entered his Airbnb, ultimately passed away from his injuries. The authorities were soon contacted by the owner of the Airbnb, who indicated that she'd noticed the video of Johnson being lifted out while reviewing her home security camera footage. Investigators subsequently released the video to the public and, with tips from the community, were reportedly able to identify the 3 men shown transporting the victim's body out of the house. They were also able to identify 29-year-old Justin Jenkins as one of the 2 armed men who'd entered the residence shortly before the shooting. He was ultimately charged with Johnson's murder, although as of the case's latest updates, the Polk County Police were still working to identify his accomplice. Number 1. Ronaldo Daga. A Filipino politician was gunned down while taking a picture of his family outside their home in Caloocan on New Year's Day 2011. Prior to his assassination, Ronaldo Daga, who was in his mid-30s at the time, had served as a councilman for Barangay 35 in Maypajo and was also a corporal in the Philippine Army Reserve Command. Moments after Dagsa's camera captured his family's posed portrait, the shooter, later identified as a convicted robber out on parole, shot him once in the right forearm and once in the chest. The politician was rushed to Martinez Hospital, where he was ultimately pronounced dead. After local police launched an investigation into the incident, it emerged that the picture Daga had taken of his wife, daughter, and mother-in-law had also captured the gunman taking aim with the murder weapon mere seconds before the fatal shots were fired. Caloocan City investigators used the chillingly timed photograph to identify the killer as Arnel Buenaflor, who was taken into custody the following week. 2 of Buenaflor's suspected accomplices were also arrested in connection to the deadly shooting. During the case's ensuing court proceedings, Buenaflor claimed to have targeted Daga in retaliation for having allegedly been shot in the head by individuals associated with the politician months earlier. Shortly after midnight on April the 18th of 2023, a pair of cheerleaders were shot after one of them got into the wrong vehicle outside a supermarket in Texas. The team's practice had just ended when the 2 went to the HEB located at 1080 East Highway 290 in Elgin with 2 other members of the cheer squad. One of the victims, 21-year-old Heather Roth, accidentally opened the door to a car she thought was her friend's, but noticed a man she didn't know in the driver's seat. After quickly realizing her mistake, she returned to her friend's vehicle. The man followed her and approached the car. When Roth rolled the window down, he opened fire, then fled the scene. Roth was grazed by a bullet, but another cheerleader, 18-year-old Peyton Washington, was shot in the leg and back, which caused her to vomit blood. Roth was treated at the scene while Washington was airlifted to a hospital. The teen reportedly sustained a shattered spleen, 2 holes in her stomach and another 2 in her diaphragm. As a result of her critical injuries, she was placed in the intensive care unit. Her ruptured spleen was removed as well as part of her pancreas. During the course of the investigation, the supermarket manager was able to identify the suspect, 25-year-old Pedro Telo Rodriguez Jr., through surveillance video, which captured the man's license plate. Rodriguez was arrested later that morning before being booked at the Bastrop County Jail on a $500,000 bond. He was facing charges that included a count of 3rd-degree felony deadly conduct and 3 counts of aggravated assault with a firearm. As per the Penal Code of the state of Texas, Rodriguez could serve up to 10 years in prison for his crimes. On June the 2nd of 2023, a judge heard that the suspect, who was an employee at the grocery store, had previously had his car broken into and robbed. Rodriguez's attorney said that the man had been startled by Roth's sudden appearance in his vehicle and thought he was going to be robbed again. Given the circumstances of the ordeal and Rodriguez's lack of a criminal record, his bail was reduced to $100,000. Number 7. Keelan Ahmad Pickins. An argument over college football ended in a deadly shooting on October the 9th of 2021. The incident took place at a home in Bessemer, a suburb of Birmingham, Alabama, while a group of friends watched a game between the Alabama Crimson Tide and the Texas A&M Aggies. The game was in its final minutes when 2 men were asked to leave the 6th Avenue residence because of an argument over which team was better. Shortly after 11 p.m., after the pair had gone outside to the parking lot, gunshots rang out. 27-year-old Keelan Ahmad Pickins was found suffering from several wounds to the torso. The young man responsible, 20-year-old Emmanuel Talbot III, fled the scene before law enforcement arrived. Pickins was taken to a hospital where he was pronounced dead early the next morning. Talbot,
reportedly turned himself into the police and was booked at the Jefferson County Jail on murder charges. His bond was set at $150,000. Number 6. Michaelpharoh. Kansas police arrested Wichita man Glenn A. Farrow on suspicion of killing his own son in March of 2017. On the night of the 19th, the 41-year-old was in his front yard arguing with his son Michael. The dispute reportedly centered on the topic of when school would resume after spring break. As the argument escalated, Glenn pulled out a .38 caliber handgun and fired it at the fleeing teen at least 3 times. Responding officers later found Michael in an alley parking zone behind Glenn's house with a gunshot wound in his torso. The victim was taken to Wesley Medical Center where he died shortly after 9:30 p.m. The next morning, Glenn was taken into police custody and booked into the Sedgwick County Jail on a $150,000 bond. He was charged with second-degree murder but pleaded guilty to an amended count of voluntary manslaughter in April. 2 months later, Glenn was sentenced to more than 20 years in prison for the filicide, which under Kansas law was the maximum sentence. The judge called the shooting a cold, heartless, soulless, and cowardly act. In court, Glenn said that he didn't deserve forgiveness from his family. Number 5. Alicia Flores. On the night of December the 30th of 2021, Alicia Flores' lifeless body was found in a vehicle parked outside of Centerfolds nightclub in Chico, California. At around 9:40 p.m., the 21-year-old had arrived at the nightclub in a white SUV along with her friend and the friend's boyfriend, Fernando Palomares, aged 29. The latter allegedly went in and out of the establishment several times before all 3 left together shortly after 10:30 p.m. An hour later, Flores' friend went back inside the club and asked the staff to call 911 because the young woman had been shot. Palomares fled the scene while Flores succumbed to several gunshot wounds, including one to her head. Palomares was later spotted walking down Highway 99 and Rowles Road, 7 miles from the nightclub, at about 4:30 p.m. When speaking to officers, he claimed that he'd been home all night and was simply out for a walk. He was arrested and taken to the Butte County Jail where he was booked on suspicion of violating parole. Law enforcement discovered that Palomares had previously been arrested in connection with a 2012 stabbing. Investigators from the Butte County Sheriff's Office found a 9mm semi-automatic handgun in Palomares' possession. According to the district attorney, ballistic testing results confirmed that it was the same weapon used in Flores' killing. On May the 20th of 2022, a judge ruled that there was sufficient evidence for Palomares to stand trial for the murder. As of the latest updates, the man remained in custody without bond. Number 4. Gabriella Gonzalez. Dallas police were called to a gas station parking lot in the 800 block of Walton Walker Boulevard on May the 10th of 2023. Dispatchers had received reports of a deadly shooting at the location in question, where officers found 26-year-old Gabriella Gonzalez dead from multiple gunshot wounds. During the investigation that followed, police learned that Gonzalez had just returned from Colorado, where she had an abortion the day before she died. The woman's ex-boyfriend, 22-year-old Harold Levance Thompson, was identified as the likely father of the unborn child. Investigators learned that Thompson had been charged with assault 2 months earlier, and that he and Gonzalez had recently ended a reportedly tumultuous 4-month involvement. An affidavit indicated that the young man had been violent throughout the entirety of the relationship. Further investigation uncovered shocking surveillance footage which showed Gonzalez and Thompson arguing in the parking lot leading up to the shooting. Gonzalez was subsequently choked by her ex, but she pushed him away. He then pulled out a firearm and gunned her down. Gonzalez's sister, who happened to be passing by the area, heard the sound of gunfire and turned to see her sister on the ground. Thompson fired several additional rounds into the incapacitated woman before fleeing the scene. The man was later arrested and booked at the Dallas County Jail without bond, charged with first-degree murder. Number 3. Whitehall City Kroger. An Ohio woman was shot in the leg outside a Kroger grocery store in Whitehall City shortly after 3 p.m. on October the 10th of 2022. The Whitehall Division of Police revealed that the shooting unfolded in the store's parking lot, located at 3675 East Broad Street. Law enforcement were called to the scene, but when they arrived, the victim and suspect had already left. They caught up with the female victim at Mount Carmel East Hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. She had reportedly known the suspect, Stephanie Robinson, prior to the incident. They'd been arguing before Robinson pulled out a gun and fired. At approximately 7:30 p.m., the 36-year-old suspect was arrested after the Whitehall SWAT team executed a search warrant at an apartment in Columbus. Robinson was charged with felonious assault and held in custody on a $125,000 bond. Number 2. Detroit parking lot. The police in Detroit, Michigan sought the general public's assistance in identifying a woman who callously fired half a dozen shots at another woman on November the 10th of 2021. The incident occurred in the parking lot of a liquor store in the 9000 block of Hayes Street. According to investigators, the 25-year-old victim was leaving the lot in a Kia Rio when gunfire rang out shortly before 11:30 p.m. The female suspect and several other people she was with at the time subsequently fled the scene in a black Mercury Mountaineer. Bullets struck the victim's car, but no injuries were reported, and the motive for the shooting was unclear. As of the latest updates, authorities were still seeking the suspect, who was wanted for aggravated assault. Number 1. Anthony Ames. A heated confrontation in the parking lot outside an Arizona 7-Eleven culminated with 79-year-old Anthony Ames being fatally hit by a car. Shortly before 4:30 p.m. on March the 24th of 2022, Ames and his friend, Joy Roman, got into an argument with Elaine Vernette Boone outside the convenience store located near the 1000 block of North Columbus Boulevard in Tucson. 20-year-old Boone subsequently drove her car directly at the pair of friends and ran them over before leaving the scene on foot. Roman later said she saw the vehicle's tire barreling towards her face in the moments before she blacked out. The collision caused both Ames and Roman to suffer life-threatening injuries, and they were taken to Banner University Medical Center. Roman sustained several broken bones, including her pelvis, ribs, and face, while Ames succumbed to extensive injuries 9 days later. Boone was identified as the individual responsible and was arrested near East Pima Street on April the 5th. She was booked at the Pima County Jail with her bail set at just over $500,000. The young woman was facing several charges, including second-degree homicide. Boone was ultimately found guilty of neglect homicide and sentenced to 30 months of incarceration to be served at the Arizona State Prison Complex, Perryville. Number 7. Cliff Des. In the early summer of 2022, Cliff Des was at his home in Heathcote, a town in central Victoria, Australia, when he heard his dogs barking ferociously outside. The 59-year-old man, a former boxing trainer, went to investigate the commotion only to find that his dogs were being accosted by a 6-foot-tall kangaroo. As Des later detailed during an interview with the Today Show, Australia, he initially attempted to ward off the large animal from afar. Emboldened by the man's hostility, the kangaroo proceeded to stand up on its back legs and chase after him. Des then recalled fleeing back to his yard before losing his footing and falling to the ground, at which point the animal reportedly pounced on his back and began attacking him. The ensuing altercation, much of which was captured on surveillance video that ultimately went viral, began with Des grabbing a nearby stick, which he used to hit the kangaroo 3 times. The man described how after the trio of strikes, the branch snapped like a carrot, and he was subsequently taken to the ground by the animal. The two were then engaged in a wrestling match that lasted several minutes, during which the top of Des's head was gouged, his finger was bitten, and his leg was gored by the animal's claw. He eventually managed to escape from the kangaroo's grasp and flee back to his house. The pugnacious marsupial nonchalantly hopped away, uninjured by the brawl. Number 6. Milo Sutcliffe. While Texas man Milo Sutcliffe was helping his wife Jennifer do some yard work at their Corpus Christi residence in May of 2018, he was bitten by the severed head of a rattlesnake. According to subsequent reports on the matter, the man had, upon taking notice of the poisonous animal, immediately struck it with a shovel, detaching its head from the rest of its body.
Believing the snake to have been killed by the decapitation, Sutcliffe reached down to pick it up, at which point it reportedly latched its fangs into his fingers. Rattlesnake venom takes effect almost instantly, so Jennifer swiftly brought her husband to a nearby hospital. There, doctors put him into a medically induced coma, in which he remained for the next 5 days. Sutcliffe's kidneys reportedly failed because of shock, and he was thus put on dialysis and given various antibiotics during his extended hospital stay. The seemingly fantastical nature of the story caused it to go viral online, but scientists were quick to clarify that it wasn't an isolated incident. Dr. Keith Boson, the director of the Arizona Poison and Drug Information Center, detailed how snakes have a natural reflex mechanism similar to that of chickens, which are able to run around even after their heads have been removed. According to Dr. Boson, diminished brain capacity precludes a beheaded snake from controlling how much venom it injects, so the creature will instinctively distribute as much as it can. Number 5. Walter Hickox. On January the 19th of 2022, Florida man Walter Hickox was captured by his doorbell security camera fighting off a black bear that had tried to enter his Daytona Beach residence. The footage, which subsequently went viral online, showed the man standing on his screened-in porch with his dogs when the bear suddenly came crashing through the doorway. Hickox swiftly sprung into action, punching the giant animal and pulling a bench in front of it to block its path. During the brief but chaotic altercation, Hickox was struck by the bear as well, reportedly sustaining minor injuries in the process. The man yelled at the hulking creature to leave, as his dogs barked at it fiercely, and eventually the animal did retreat. According to a press release by the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, bear biologists were working in conjunction with law enforcement officers in an effort to capture the bear. Per the commission's policy, the animal, if captured, would be put down humanely because it poses a threat to human safety. Number 4. Travis Kaufman. On February the 4th of 2019, runner Travis Kaufman was running in the mountains of Fort Collins, Colorado, when he was attacked by a mountain lion. During a press conference held by the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Agency, 31-year-old Kaufman detailed how he'd been running down a trail at the Horsetooth Mountain Park at the time of the incident. He'd initially been alarmed by the sound of pine needles rustling behind him, before he eventually realized that he was being stalked by the wild lion, which proceeded to charge him. He then locked his jaws around Kaufman's wrists and began clawing at his face and arms. The man, who claimed to have been fueled by a sudden burst of adrenaline, eventually wrestled the big cat to the ground, hit its head with a rock, and fruitlessly attempted to stab its neck with sticks. Their fight continued for nearly 10 minutes, during which time they rolled down onto the south end of the trail. Finally, Kaufman was reportedly able to pin the mountain lion's legs back and lodge his foot into its neck, restricting its breathing until it ultimately suffocated to death. He was taken to the hospital where he was treated for numerous injuries, including lacerations to his nose and cheek that needed about 20 stitches. Number 3. James Collins. An elderly Maine resident was working in the backyard of his Woolwich residence with a motorized trimmer when he was suddenly attacked by a pair of wild foxes on August the 6th of 2020. The man, identified as 79-year-old James Collins, detailed how he was ambushed by the animals, one of which grabbed his boots and attempted to drag him away. He used the weed whacker to strike the fox several times until it eventually let go of him and fled. Upon getting back to his feet, Collins noticed the second fox charging towards him from about 100 yards away. When it reached him, the man used a cane that was positioned nearby to fend it off until it too ran away. The animals ultimately fled towards a brook beyond Collins's backyard, where he believed their den was located. Having been bitten several times on his arms and legs, Collins went to the hospital where he received medical treatment. The man later indicated that he didn't think the foxes were rabid because they had coordination. However, doctors chose to err on the side of caution by treating him for rabies anyway, as it's impossible to confirm whether an animal is infected with the disease while it's still alive. The year prior to Collins's encounter with the aggressive foxes, 18 residents of the neighboring city of Bath had been attacked by rabid foxes following a rabies outbreak. Number 2. Reed Roberts. Canadian man Reed Roberts and his dog Pacer were running at a provincial park near the University of Northern British Columbia when they came upon a mother black bear and its cubs. According to the CBC, 46-year-old Roberts, a Prince George resident, had accidentally approached the wild animal which was protecting its 2 cubs in the bushes at the side of the running trail. The bear emerged from the brush and immediately went into attack mode, charging Roberts and knocking him to the ground. In a Facebook post describing the incident, the man recalled lying on his back and trying to kick the animal off of him. At some point, Roberts' dog was able to momentarily distract the bear by biting and barking at it, affording the man enough time to scramble behind some nearby bushes. The bear then charged him for a second time, but Pacer once again managed to divert its attention and eventually led it down the trail, away from a badly bleeding Roberts. The latter subsequently climbed a tree and dialed 911 before staggering back to the parking lot. He was taken to the hospital, where he was treated for a myriad of mostly superficial injuries, including claw scratches, bruises, and a punctured hand that required 16 stitches to mend. Pacer fortunately came away from the altercation with the bear uninjured. Later that same day, the dog showed up at Roberts' friend's house, roughly a mile away from where they'd been trail running. It was reported that the mother bear had been euthanized, while its cubs were transported to a wildlife shelter in Smithers. Number 1. Greg Tonkins. Australian zookeeper Greg Tonkins made international headlines in December of 2016 when he was captured punching a kangaroo in the face in an attempt to save his dog. The viral video clip was met with intense controversy, with many animal activists labeling the 36-year-old a thug for what they considered to be an abusive attack on a vulnerable creature. Others praised Tonkins for his willingness to risk his own safety to protect his pet dog. In the video, Tonkins was shown standing toe-to-toe with the marsupial for several seconds after it released the dog from a vicious headlock. The man then landed a single blow directly to the animal's face, sending it scurrying away into the nearby bushes. After the footage had been disseminated online, Tonkins' actions were condemned by the animal rights organization PETA, which called the infamous punch neither funny nor brave, claiming it was actually illegal. There were even calls for Tonkins to lose his job as the elephant keeper at Taronga Western Plains Zoo as a consequence for the incident. Tonkins, a sitting member of the Australian Pig Doggers and Hunters Association, publicly defended his actions. In 2019, he posted a picture of himself laying in the grass alongside 3 kangaroos, attempting to convey his fondness for the species, in stark contrast to the widespread media depiction of him as a heartless animal abuser. At the time of the Tonkins altercation with the kangaroo, he and a group of friends had reportedly been taking part in a hunting trip at a rural property in Condobolin, New South Wales. The trip had been organized for a 19-year-old member of the group who was dying of cancer and ultimately passed away a few months later. After allegedly assaulting a teacher in Keelan, Texas, a 17-year-old was held in the Bell County Jail in December of 2019. The incident, which unfolded on December the 2nd, happened while Tyler Cravens was under an in-school suspension due to a prior offense. As cell phone use wasn't permitted for suspended students, teacher Sam Jones reportedly collected the students' devices. Cravens subsequently rushed Jones and pushed him over a desk. According to law enforcement records, a portion of the attack was caught on video, which appeared to show Jones on the floor as he was being punched by the student, suffering knee and shoulder injuries in the process. Eventually, Cravens was escorted out of the classroom, but he continued to be aggressive, according to the arrest affidavit. On December the 10th, the teen was charged as an adult with third-degree felony assault on a public servant and held on a $35,000 bond. Number 11. Texas freshman.
An investigation was launched in Fort Worth, Texas, after a video of a high schooler being aggressive toward her teacher was posted online in November of 2021. The footage showed a Castleberry High School freshman approach a substitute teacher who was on the phone and pressed the receiver to end the call. When the woman tried to move the student's hand away, the teen slapped her arm. The girl then proceeded to use the phone, saying she'd call her mother as she shouted profanities at the substitute. She subsequently commented on the teacher's race while talking on the phone. In the aftermath, the mother of the girl, Brittany Evans, told WFAA she was sorry for her daughter's behavior and didn't know where she learned the racially offensive language she was using. Evans added that her daughter, who was autistic and bipolar, was facing a 3-day suspension as a consequence. Number 10. Special education student in Dallas. In January of 2021, an attack carried out by a 17-year-old special needs student during class eventually gave way to a lawsuit against the Independent School District of Dallas, Texas. On January the 8th, Charla Sims, a special education teaching assistant at Spruce High School, allegedly suffered physical violence at the hands of one of her male students. Following the attack, the 56-year-old suffered from intense pain in her abdomen. Doctors reportedly discovered a tear in her aorta, which eventually caused her to become paralyzed. She succumbed to her injuries on January the 11th. The victim's family claimed that they'd only found out about the incident when a former district employee made a disclosure in September of 2022 about the administration's alleged failure to take action in response to the attack. The family's attorneys claimed there were at least 3 other documented assaults involving the same student. On January the 4th of 2023, Sims's family filed a federal lawsuit accusing the Dallas Independent School District of negligence. They demanded reform in the district's classrooms and sought $20 million in damages. Number 9. Russian student. A staggering moment in which a Russian teen in the town of Neryongry was stopped by his classmates from hitting their teacher was caught on camera and subsequently went viral. The video, which was posted in October of 2016, showed the male teacher reportedly struggling to gain the attention of the student in question, who had his headphones on in the middle of a class. After the boy ignored him, the teacher took his device away. The boy then stood up and shouted at the teacher before charging him and throwing a punch. The rest of the class subsequently intervened, pulling the incensed student away. The group managed to take the boy out of the classroom to defuse the situation. The Daily Mail reported that the teacher refused to press charges, although law enforcement did conduct an investigation after the video gained traction online. This picture was also taken at a Russian school, so it looks like teachers don't have it very easy over there. Number 8. North Carolina middle school student. An 8th grade teacher at Topsail Middle School in Hampstead, North Carolina, sued the school board and district leaders after being attacked by a special needs student on April the 19th of 2018. The incident occurred toward the end of Kimberly Burns Fisher's inclusion class, in which the student was called out for saying the word moron. Burns Fisher told the teenage boy to bring over his communication log. Upon approaching the teacher, the boy threw his book back at her, hitting her head. He then lunged at her, knocking her into a chair. When Burns Fisher fell, the student began kicking her in the head and back, leaving her with a concussion, a cut on the face, and a black eye. According to the Pender County Sheriff's Office, a secure order was issued against the student on April the 24th after the findings of an investigation into the assault was submitted to the state's Department of Juvenile Justice. Following the ordeal, Burns Fisher's injuries made it impossible for her to work. 3 years later, she accused the school's principal at the time of the incident, the Pender County Board of Education, and the superintendent of ignoring warning signs and failing to act prior to the attack. The lawsuit claimed that the student who attacked Burns Fisher had 14 prior incidents of violence and that the defendants had knowledge of his behavioral troubles since 2011. As of the latest updates made in January of 2023, the federal courts were upholding a qualified immunity defense and would clear the former principal of responsibility for damages. The legal claims against the school board and the superintendent were still pending. Number 7. Jordan Lee.
In April of 2023, a Texas student was held in custody on a $40,000 bond after assaulting a teacher at Jasper High School. Following the attack, which occurred on April the 6th, an arrest warrant was issued for 18-year-old Jordan Lee. She immediately turned herself in at the Jasper County Jail. The following week, she was charged with 1 count of injury to an elderly person with intent to cause bodily injury and 1 count of assaulting a public servant. She was facing the possibility of spending between 2 and 10 years behind bars as a result. It's unclear if the motive for the assault had yet been determined, but detectives were working with the school's resource officer to further investigate. Number 6. Lariana Jackson. A Louisiana teen relentlessly pummeled her 64-year-old wheelchair-bound teacher on October the 6th of 2021. Gruesome footage of the attack showed 18-year-old Covington High School student Lariana Jackson talking to the elderly woman before unleashing her vicious assault. As the educator fell to the floor, Jackson continued throwing closed fist punches. Injuries sustained in the attack caused the victim to seek medical attention. Subsequently, Jackson was arrested and held in the St. Tammany Parish Jail on a felony battery charge. According to local police, the attack was motivated by a TikTok challenge. The next day, 2 additional suspects were charged with unlawful posting of criminal activity. 18-year-old Trinity Gervais and an unnamed juvenile turned themselves into law enforcement after they'd been identified by detectives. The latter was released on a custodial agreement. In March of 2022, Gervais pleaded guilty to recording and posting the incident online. On September the 21st, Jackson pleaded guilty to second-degree battery and cruelty to the infirmed. She was sentenced to 5 years of incarceration, with 4 years suspended, to be followed by 3 years of probation with mental health counseling and anger management classes. Number 5. DeJour Russell and Christopher Taylor. In southern Nigeria, an assault occurred at Calabar High School after 33-year-old teacher Sanjay Shaw tried to borrow beds for students joining a physics camp on December the 15th of 2018. The track team on campus attempted to steal the beds from the physics lab. They were reportedly aggressive, kicking the door open as they entered the lab. Camera footage revealed that 18-year-old DeJour Russell and Christopher Taylor, aged 19, together with other student athletes, got into a heated verbal exchange with Shaw. One of the athletes reportedly slapped Shaw's phone, which he was using to record the incident. A track team member then stepped on the device to keep Shaw from retrieving, causing a piece of glass from the phone to pierce Shaw's palm. The incident was reported to school officials, but no disciplinary actions were taken until March the 12th of the following year, when Russell and Taylor were suspended for a week. The latter was still allowed to compete during the duration of his suspension. Number 4. Florida preschooler. A teacher was beaten on the morning of March the 2nd of 2022, but charges weren't filed due to the age of the student responsible. The incident, which took place at Pines Lakes Elementary School in Pembroke Pines, Florida, started after Trisha Meadows' preschool class became unruly. The special needs teacher had to take one of them to another room. Meadows subsequently requested support on the school radio after the boy attacked and jumped on her with his full body weight. When responders arrived, they found the teacher weak and dazed, coughing and dry heaving. She was rushed to Memorial Regional Hospital, where she was intubated due to her severe injuries. In the aftermath, Meadows didn't want to prosecute the student. Legal experts told NBC News that the boy lacked the criminal intent needed for prosecution. Number 3. Odessa 8th grader. After having his phone confiscated, an 8th grader at Bowie Middle School in Odessa, Texas, violently attacked his teacher. Footage of the incident, which was posted in September of 2022, showed the teen talking to the teacher before trying to get the confiscated device back. A struggle ensued, which quickly escalated to violence as the boy threw punches and grabbed the teacher's hair. At one point, the woman fell to the ground as the student kept pummeling her. In the aftermath, the boy was charged with aggravated assault on a public servant, a first-degree felony. According to CBS, he was sentenced to 4 years of probation in order to perform 56 hours of community service. Additionally, the judge ordered his parents to attend a parenting class. Number 2. Brendan Deeper. On February the 21st of 2023, Brendan Deeper from Palm Coast, Florida, was accused of assaulting a teacher's aide who reportedly took his Nintendo Switch.
Gruesome CCTV footage taken at Matanzas High School showed the 17-year-old rushing up to the woman and pushing her to the ground before punching and kicking her. The violent attack was stopped after a group of people restrained the teen. Deeper was arrested, then released from the Juvenile Justice Department's custody the next day. When his case was transferred to adult court, he was rearrested on February the 24th on a felony count of aggravated battery. He was jailed on a $1 million bond and was facing the possibility of spending up to 30 years behind bars. Number 1. Georgia 9th grader. A 9th grader at Heritage High School in Conyers, Georgia, was jailed for attacking a longtime teacher, Tiwana Turner, on January the 26th of 2023. Turner later said that she was trying to correct the female student's distracted behavior by taking her phone. The girl subsequently went off, attacking the teacher and throwing her to the ground, at which point she rained down a flurry of strikes. Turner was hospitalized for knee injuries and a broken leg. The student was charged with aggravated battery, to which she pleaded guilty. As Fox 5 Atlanta reported in April of 2023, she was sentenced to a year at a youth detention center, followed by a 5-year term of supervised release. The lifeless body of 29-year-old Lauren Hiker was found near a hiking trail in Phoenix, Arizona on April the 29th of 2023. The woman had often gone on walks along the trail, which was located about a half-mile from her home. Her body presented with defensive wounds to the hands and arms. Law enforcement determined that she'd likely attempted to fend off an attacker and may also have been chased over or through a barbed wire fence. Investigators quickly identified 22-year-old Zion William Teasley as a suspect. The young man had reportedly been fired from his job for being aggressive toward female employees. Teasley's former employers told police that he often carried a pocket knife, which would have been consistent with the weapon used to murder Hiker. The latter had 15 stab wounds on her upper body, according to the medical examiner. During the initial stages of the investigation, detectives had trouble determining a motive for Teasley's attack on Hiker, expressing their belief that it was entirely unprovoked. At the time, the suspect was already on probation in connection with unrelated robbery, armed robbery, and disorderly conduct convictions. He'd been released from prison in November of 2022. In a probable cause document, Teasley was quoted as saying, "I am definitely not the person who plans to kill another person. If I was going to do something like that, it wouldn't be premeditated." He pleaded not guilty the day after a Maricopa County grand jury indicted him on one count of first-degree murder. Authorities indicated Teasley's trial could commence in January of 2024. Number 6. Wendy Karina Martinez. On the night of September the 18th of 2018, a bloodied woman stumbled into a Chinese restaurant in Washington, D.C.'s trendy Logan Circle neighborhood. The individual in question, later identified as Wendy Karina Martinez, was suffering from multiple upper body stab wounds. She tried to alert customers to her assailant, who by that time had already fled the scene. 35-year-old Martinez was taken to a nearby hospital where she was pronounced dead. The victim was described as an avid runner who worked for a local software company. She had reportedly gotten engaged just a week prior to her death. On the night of the incident, Martinez had gone for a jog near her apartment in Logan Circle. At some point, the Georgetown alumna was accosted by a total stranger who proceeded to stab her 6 times in the head and neck, as well as once in the back. At the onset of the investigation, police offered a $25,000 reward for information leading to the suspect's capture. With the help of surveillance footage and tips from the community, authorities were able to identify Martinez's killer as Anthony Crawford, at the time in his early 20s. Within a couple of days, the young man was found in a park and taken in for questioning. The following morning, he was arrested and charged with murder. Witnesses who'd encountered Crawford prior to the stabbing said he was behaving so erratically that they crossed the street to avoid walking near him. He had a documented history of mental illness and an addiction to the synthetic marijuana known as spice, which was banned in the States. In June of 2019, Crawford pleaded guilty, and that September, he was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Number 5. Mariana Jurado. California woman Mariana Jurado from the city of Salinas headed to work shortly after 9:30 a.m.
On November the 19th of 2019, the 26-year-old who was pregnant at the time was leaving her home near Clay Street and Cayuga Street when a man approached and attacked her in what was later described as a random act of violence. Ronaldo was stabbed multiple times by 43-year-old Garrett Sheff, a complete stranger. Emergency personnel were called to the scene where Ronaldo was fortunately able to communicate with police officers and provide a description of Sheff. Not long after her subsequent arrival at the hospital, the expectant mother succumbed to her injuries. Law enforcement searched the area and ultimately located the suspect about a block from the scene of the crime. Sheff was booked at the Monterey County Jail charged with murder. His bond was set at a reported $1 million. At the time of his arrest, the man already had a criminal history that included a number of felony, misdemeanor, and traffic cases dating back to 2005. Some of his past offenses per court records included second-degree burglary, possession of a controlled substance, obstructing or resisting an officer, buying and receiving stolen property, and grand theft. At the time of his run-in with Ronaldo, Sheff was reportedly homeless and suffering from paranoid delusions. In January of 2020, a judge ordered him to undergo a mental health evaluation, which led to him being declared unfit to stand trial. The most recent updates on the matter failed to disclose whether he'd since been restored to mental competency. Number 4. Ramatola David Yagobi. Shortly after noon on May the 31st of 2021, police in Anaheim, California were dispatched to the intersection of Catalpa Avenue and Falmouth Avenue for a report of an assault in progress. Officers found Ramatola David Yagobi suffering from severe head trauma and arranged for him to be taken to a local hospital. Meanwhile, law enforcement located and detained the man suspected of having attacked Yagobi, identified as 30-year-old David Abbott. A police spokesman said that before the police were called, Abbott had randomly attacked an unnamed 60-year-old in his front yard. The homeowner chased off the suspect, who then zeroed in on 70-year-old Yagobi, launching an assault on him as well. The victim reportedly succumbed to his injuries at the hospital. Upon being taken into custody, Abbott was charged with murder and assault with force likely to produce great bodily injury. He was held at the Anaheim jail on a $2 million bond. Only a few weeks prior to his unprovoked rampage, Abbott had reportedly been arrested in connection with an unrelated violent incident. He was charged with assault with a deadly weapon before being bonded out just 11 days before the deadly attack on Yagobi. Number 3. Edward Brett Davidson. 39-year-old Edward Brett Davidson was stabbed in the hallway outside his condo in the Inglewood neighborhood of central Calgary on August the 27th of 2022. He'd been minding his own business when out of nowhere, a man he'd never met before confronted him. The stranger plunged a knife into Davidson before fleeing the scene. The victim stumbled out of the building and collapsed on the ground. Numerous bystanders, as well as staff from the fitness center on the ground floor of the building, rushed to the man's aid. However, he ultimately passed away after being transported to a hospital. Law enforcement used CCTV footage to identify the suspect as Corey Carl Miklich, also known as Corey Jabo, aged 41. Dozens of officers joined the ensuing search effort, which led to the perpetrator being apprehended several hours later. Though initially charged with manslaughter, Miklich subsequently had his charge upgraded to second-degree murder. Back in February of 2020, the man had been arrested for a similarly random assault, which took place at St. Mary's College. Miklich and Davidson had been complete strangers prior to their fatal altercation. The latter, a Navy veteran, had just recently moved to Calgary in search of a new adventure, according to his family. Number 2. Dimitri Goldfarb. A New York City man was sucker punched by a total stranger as he walked along the boardwalk in Brighton Beach on July the 9th of 2019. 52-year-old Dimitri Goldfarb was struck in the face with such force that he was knocked unconscious and had his right orbital bone shattered. He was rushed to NYU Langone Hospital in Brooklyn before being transferred to Bellevue Hospital. Despite extensive life-saving efforts by doctors from both medical centers, the victim was ultimately pronounced dead a day later. As shown in surveillance footage, the individual who punched Goldfarb was a shirtless white man initially estimated to be in his 30s. He was seen walking with a woman as he fled northbound on Brighton 6th Street in the aftermath of the attack.
Before Goldfarb died, he was able to speak with investigators, telling them he had no idea why he'd been slugged. 5 months later, around Thanksgiving, authorities announced that they'd finally identified and apprehended the suspect, who was identified as 22-year-old Kyle Gulino. The latter was charged with assault and manslaughter. Number 1. Hannah Cornelius and Chesley Marsh. On the night of May the 27th of 2017, university student Hannah Cornelius and her friend Chesley Marsh endured a harrowing 11-hour campaign of violence at the hands of 4 total strangers. After a night out in Stellenbosch, South Africa, the friends were parked in a secluded spot as they decided their next move. 21-year-old Cornelius offered to give Marsh a ride home. However, as they sat in the car, a group of 4 men approached and circled the vehicle like a pack of wolves. As shown in CCTV footage, the men, armed with a screwdriver and a flick knife, proceeded to attack the defenseless victims. 22-year-old Marsh was forced into the back seat and then into the trunk. Meanwhile, Cornelius was wedged between the 2 front seats as the gang drove away. They eventually stopped at a petrol station to withdraw cash from Marsh's bank account. The latter gave the men the wrong PIN, so they ultimately left empty-handed. Subsequently, the gang drove to a remote area where Marsh was viciously beaten. As Cornelius watched in horror, the young man was knocked out and left for dead in a pool of his own blood. The assailants then shifted their focus toward Cornelius, whom they drove to a farm road 12 miles outside Stellenbosch. The young woman pleaded for mercy, even offering to allow the men to abuse her if they spared her life. Nevertheless, after she was assaulted and stabbed in the neck, the gangsters dropped a large rock on Cornelius's head, crushing her skull. Her lifeless body was left at the scene while the attackers continued their horrific crime spree. They mugged a woman in nearby Kraaifontein before leading police on a high-speed chase in Cornelius's stolen vehicle. The pursuit culminated in the 4 suspects' arrest. Miraculously, Marsh regained consciousness the next day, and although he was left deaf in one ear, he managed to survive the ordeal. The men responsible for the random attack were identified as Nashville Julius, Geraldo Parsons, Eben Van Niekerk, and Vernon Whitboy, all in their 20s. Following a trial at Cape Town High Court in 2018, the gang members were each given lengthy prison sentences totaling a combined 358 years. Number 8. Anthony Fraser. On the evening of April the 18th of 2022, security guard Anthony Fraser arrived early for his shift at an American Seafood and Wings in Atlanta, Georgia. As shown by CCTV footage, 30-year-old Fraser exited his SUV and then tried to light up a cigarette. Simultaneously, a man wearing a face mask approached him from behind. Fraser couldn't see what he was doing, but the security cameras caught him discreetly pulling out a handgun. Moments later, he shot the security guard in the back of the head. The suspect searched him and took his service weapon as well as other unspecified items before walking away. In doing so, he passed an older man who'd witnessed the incident in its entirety while sitting on the curb. The witness, seemingly unfazed by the horrific incident, then got up, walked by Fraser and shook his head without stopping. Not long afterwards, 2 men and a woman rounded the corner and approached the security guard, as he was either dead or dying on the sidewalk. It wasn't clear if they had any connection to the shooter, but one of the men bent down to take something off Fraser. They left by the time the police and emergency services arrived at the scene, where Fraser was pronounced dead. Upon reviewing the footage, the police sought to question the witness and the passing trio, while the gunman was identified as career criminal Stanley Henderson, aged 30. A few days after the incident, officers tracked him to an urban encampment not far from the restaurant. They chased him through nearby woods with a canine unit, and one officer was non-fatally injured before Henderson was apprehended. The man was charged with 1 count of felony murder and 2 counts of aggravated assault, while officials noted that robbery was the main reason behind the shooting. Number 7. Calvin Munnerlyn. 45-year-old Michigan woman Charmel Teague was denied entry to a Family Dollar store in Flint because her daughter, Briar Bishop, wasn't wearing a face mask, as mandated by executive orders to stop the spread of COVID-19. Enraged, Charmel then started yelling at the security guard, 43-year-old Calvin Munnerlyn, and spat on him. The latter reportedly responded by pushing her. She then contacted her husband Larry and her son, 23-year-old Ramonier Bishop. Not long after the initial incident, Larry went to the store and asked to speak with the security guard. Mullen tried to de-escalate the situation, but a masked assailant, later identified as Ramonier, walked up behind him and shot him once in the back of the head. Larry and Ramonier ran away from the scene, and the security guard, reported as a father of 9, was later pronounced dead in the aftermath. Larry fled to Texas, where he was arrested on May the 7th at a hotel in West Houston, while Ramonier was taken into custody the following day in Bay City. The two men and Shawnell faced charges of felony firearm possession and first-degree premeditated murder. Brier was charged with tampering with evidence, lying to police investigating a violent crime, and accessory after the fact to a felony. As of September of 2022, the 4 family members' fate still remained to be determined by a jury. Number 6. Incident in Greer. In the summer of 2016, law enforcement in Greer, South Carolina, released surveillance photos and asked for the public's help in identifying a shoplifting suspect. The woman, who remained unnamed as of subsequent information, was accused of trying to pepper spray a loss prevention officer when she was caught stealing. The incident took place at a Target on July the 2nd. The officer approached the woman after seeing her filling her purse with clothes and sunglasses from the store. She initially appeared willing to talk to him before pulling out a can of pepper spray. She tried to discharge it at the officer and then took off running, dropping her purse in the process. The suspect, believed to be aged between 18 and 25, fled in a white Dodge Nitro, and store staff subsequently recovered 12 articles of clothing and 2 pairs of sunglasses, totaling $231 from her purse. The loss prevention officer denied medical assistance in the aftermath. Number 5. Natasha Lawson. Malibu woman Kashmir Duran faced up to 6 years in prison in the fall of 2020 after attacking a security guard in the parking lot of a Pavilion supermarket in West Hollywood, California. In October, 37-year-old Duran was having a heated argument with her father when security guard Natasha Lawson tried to intervene. Duran then reoriented her rage towards the woman and threw a glass water bottle at her. A physical struggle ensued between them, during which Duran caught Lawson's finger in her mouth and forcefully bit into it, causing bleeding. The former also repeatedly launched racially charged epithets at the black security guard. The fight ended up with both of them wrestling on the ground before they were eventually separated. A portion of the altercation was captured on cell phone video by a bystander. As Duran's father tried driving away with her as a passenger in the car, their path was blocked by staff and customers. In a video posted to YouTube, Duran was then seen throwing dog food at other black store staff and again using the N-word. She was arrested and charged with 1 felony count each of assault with a deadly weapon and assault by means of force likely to produce great bodily injury, as well as 1 misdemeanor charge of violation of civil rights. As of the latest information available to the media, Duran had pleaded not guilty. Number 4. Zoa Stigler. At around 2 a.m. on May the 12th of 2017, an inebriated man collapsed near the front door of the 30 North Franklin condos in Chicago. Zoa Stigler, who'd been working security at the building for several months, went outside with a mop and bucket to clean up after he'd vomited on the sidewalk. The 46-year-old had initially offered to call for help before telling a stranger, who in the meantime had gotten to his feet, he couldn't remain in the area. What followed was captured on the building's high-resolution security cameras. The man, later identified as 23-year-old Portage Park resident Matthew DeLeon, was soon joined by 3 companions. He refused to leave and then threw a water bottle at Stigler. The security guard moved towards DeLeon, at which point he punched her in the face, sending her staggering backwards into the bucket. His friends, 2 women and 1 man, didn't intervene and they all walked away. The punch left Stigler with a fractured bone underneath her eye and a broken bone above the bridge of her nose. The security guard was treated at a hospital and informed that she might need surgery for her injuries. Stigler subsequently told the media that she could deal with a black eye and was grateful to be able to go home and see her children and grandchildren. DeLeon later surrendered to the authorities and was charged with aggravated battery, causing great bodily harm, aggravated battery in a public place, and aggravated battery to a peace officer. DeLeon an active member of the US Army at the time of the incident, was reported as being very remorseful for his actions. He subsequently left the Army with a less than honorable discharge and pleaded guilty to the attack on Stigler. In 2019, he was sentenced to 3 years in prison and would have to serve half of his sentence before being eligible for parole. Number 3. Douglas Rollman and Gina Petchia shoplifting incident. A duo faced multiple charges in connection to an attack on a security guard at a Macy's in Danbury, Connecticut. In June of 2016, Douglas Rollman and Gina Petchia, both in their 20s and from New York, were observed trying to shoplift items from the store. Law enforcement was alerted, but before they arrived at the scene, the store's security guard, whose identity wasn't released, tried to handcuff Rollman. It was then that Petchia became aggressive and tried to strangle the guard. In the ensuing struggle, Rollman kicked him in the abdomen before he and his accomplice fled. The police caught up with them in the parking lot, where they found Rollman still wearing the cuffs on one of his wrists and with a stolen pair of men's jeans worth less than $50 in his possession. The couple were taken into custody and each charged with several counts of robbery, larceny and assault, with an added third-degree strangulation charge for Petchia. Number 2. Delonte Maxey. In September of 2022, the authorities in Houston, Texas, released surveillance photos and asked for the public's help in identifying a murder suspect. On the morning of September the 14th, the man had gotten into an argument with 32-year-old Delonte Maxey, who was working security at Club Onyx. Maxey had followed in his father's footsteps, and after amassing a decade in experience as a guard, was working towards starting his own security company. He and the suspect exchanged words, during which the latter flashed a gun but didn't fire it before leaving in a Jeep Trackhawk. Moments later, the SUV returned to the club. As Maxey approached the vehicle, he was shot, sustaining critical injuries to which he succumbed in a local hospital. Less than a week after the fatal shooting, the security guard's grieving family pleaded with the suspect to surrender to the police. Maxey's sister addressed the man through the media to say, "You could have just left like it did. You could have just kept going." Number 1. Morgan Hickman attack. In August of 2022, Morgan Hickman of West Palm Beach, Florida, walked out the front doors of the Boca Regional Hospital. Staff then requested that a security guard go outside and ask her to return. The unnamed man found her talking to a construction worker, whom she'd asked for a cigarette. When the guard told 23-year-old Hickman that the nursing staff was ready for her, the woman screamed that she wouldn't move until she got a cigarette. Then, as she and the guard were standing close to each other, she suddenly threw a punch at him. They went to the ground, but the man was able to control Hickman and bring her to her feet. She kept trying to leave and became more agitated upon seeing Boca Raton police. She eventually threw her phone at another uniformed hospital security officer, hitting him in the lip. Hickman was arrested and booked into Palm Beach County Jail on the morning of August the 9th on 2 felony counts of battery on a licensed security guard. While in custody, she admitted to having hit the security guard in the face and claimed to have done so because he wasn't listening to her, adding that she'd only wanted a cigarette. Number 9. Gerald Melton. An aspiring singer-songwriter from Nashville, Tennessee, was involved in a violent altercation with a homeless man in the early morning hours of August the 26th of 2017. As per subsequent reports, 54-year-old Gerald Melton was attempting to sleep on the sidewalk near Music Row when he became disturbed by exhaust fumes and loud music coming from a Porsche SUV. The man requested that the driver, 26-year-old Katie Quackenbush, move the vehicle elsewhere. She refused, and the two then became embroiled in a heated shouting match, which eventually led to Quackenbush climbing out of the SUV with a firearm in hand. By that point, Melton had already begun walking back towards his sleeping area, as he later told investigators. When an armed Quackenbush approached him, however, the argument continued, culminating with 2 shots being fired into the man's abdomen. Neither Quackenbush nor the female passenger in her car contacted the authorities about the injured victim. Instead, an uninvolved bystander who came upon Melton wounded on the sidewalk alerted emergency responders. He was taken to Vanderbilt University Medical Center, where he remained in critical condition for weeks before his eventual release. During questioning, Quackenbush claimed to have fired the gun as a warning to Melton, whom she accused of approaching her threateningly.
She was nevertheless charged with attempted first-degree murder and aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. In April of 2022, Quackenbush was found guilty of the lesser charge of reckless endangerment, and her sentencing hearing was scheduled for October later that year. Number 8. Jack Burney. Englishman Jack Burney was knocked unconscious during an altercation on Cowper Street in Northampton at around noon on April the 23rd of 2022. The 32-year-old was hospitalized before ultimately succumbing to his injuries a couple of days later. Northamptonshire police subsequently arrested 25-year-old Mark Peter Dowling on suspicion of murder. Court records indicated that Burney and Dowling had been amongst a group of men who'd gotten into a street fight that afternoon. 2 other men were arrested in connection to the incident but were released on bail pending further investigation. As of the latest updates on the matter, investigators had called upon the general public, seeking any witnesses that might possess information that could help them gain a clearer picture of the events that led to Burney's premature death. Number 7. Lloyd Gaudry. 2 warring groups of people gathered for a street fight near the 2100 block of 16th Street South in Great Falls, Montana, on March the 23rd of 2018. The dispute reportedly stemmed from previous altercations between several members of each group. At one point during the ensuing mayhem, 45-year-old Lloyd Gaudry was struck in the neck with what was described as a hatchet. He suffered a single, sharp force wound that fractured his cervical spine and transected his left vertebral artery, killing him instantly. Local police subsequently conducted interviews with eyewitnesses who identified 35-year-old James Michael Parker as the individual wielding the hatchet, which it would later emerge he'd purchased a few weeks earlier. At the time of the street brawl, Parker had reportedly been out on probation for a previous conviction. Following Gaudry's slaying, he was taken back into custody on charges that included assault with a weapon, witness tampering, and deliberate homicide. In September of 2021, Parker was convicted of the aforementioned criminal counts. 2 months later, he was consequently sentenced to an aggregate total of 65 years in prison. Number 6. Carla Harrison. Early on April the 4th of 2015, Baltimore police were called to the 2800 block of Edmondson Avenue after receiving reports of a street brawl between several people. Responding officers broke up the 2 groups of women who'd been arguing with one another. However, about 15 minutes later, the same officers came upon a large group of people congregating outside of a carry-out restaurant. They found a pair of female victims suffering from apparent stab wounds. The first, a 36-year-old woman, presented with severe injuries to her stomach and was quickly rushed to the hospital, where she ultimately died a short time later. The second victim, a 30-year-old woman, had reportedly been stabbed in the leg and was hospitalized with what were described as non-life-threatening injuries. Upon launching a full-scale investigation into the matter, the police reviewed surveillance footage that showed the 36-year-old victim, named as Carla Harrison, getting into an altercation with 22-year-old Michelle Johnson inside the restaurant. At some point, Johnson brandished some type of sharp object with which she began slashing Harrison, inflicting her mortal wounds in the process. The young woman was consequently arrested and charged with first-degree murder, to which she pleaded guilty. In Baltimore's Circuit Court, Johnson was handed down a life sentence, suspended for all but 35 years, followed by 3 years of probation. Number 5. Paul Duran. On the night of July the 20th of 2022, emergency responders were called to the scene of a violent street fight between 2 men in South Gippsland, a local government area in Victoria, Australia. Upon their arrival, paramedics were reportedly unable to revive a man who'd been left critically injured by the altercation. 39-year-old Paul Duran was thus pronounced dead at the scene. The man's death was the result of a reported street brawl with an individual whose identity hadn't been determined as of the latest developments. Homicide detectives canvassed the streets of the tight-knit country town of Foster, where the incident occurred, in an attempt to gather more information about the events that led to Duran's premature demise. It was reported that a 43-year-old man had been taken into custody in connection to the fatal street fight, but was later released pending further inquiries. Number 4.
Jordan Moazami. Amateur UK boxer Jordan Moazami was killed in an alleyway near a Birmingham golf club on the evening of April the 24th of 2019. 18-year-old Moazami had reportedly gotten into an argument with two other teens, one of whom proceeded to pull out a knife and stab him in the neck after chasing him down. Emergency medical services were called to the scene, where they pronounced the young man dead. The individuals with whom Moazami had become entangled were later identified as 19-year-old Mashoud Giwa and Hamed Hussein, aged 18. Only hours before the deadly incident, Giwa had reportedly received a suspended jail sentence in connection to knife possession charges. Then later that night, Giwa and Hussein got into a fight with Moazami that reportedly centered around their drug use. The victim had been a respected member of the community who'd served as a peer mentor at Continental Star Football Club, steering vulnerable youngsters away from crime. Following a criminal trial at Birmingham Crown Court, Giwa was acquitted of manslaughter and released from custody, while Hussein was convicted of murder. He was consequently sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 19 years. Number 3. Conor Cleave. In April of 2014, two friends from Fife in eastern Scotland got into a vicious fight on the streets of Metherhill. 17-year-old Conor Cleave was reportedly stabbed in the heart by Jamie Wishart, aged 22, after the pair's heated row turned violent. Although the catalyst of their dispute wasn't immediately disclosed to the public, Scottish police revealed that the victim suffered a puncture wound to his heart that ultimately proved fatal. Cleave's mother, who'd been a witness to her son's killing, testified in court that she'd seen a big hole in his chest as he lay dying in the streets that fateful night. Another witness claimed to have seen Wishart plunge something shiny into Cleave's chest. Wishart initially faced a murder charge but was ultimately found guilty of culpable homicide following his trial at the High Court of Glasgow. The young man was consequently jailed for 10 years. Number 2. Moise Udin. At about 2:40 a.m. on July the 11th of 2018, a street fight in the Chinese city of Nanjing between a local man and an international student from Pakistan turned deadly. The student, identified as 26-year-old Moise Udin, had just left a popular bar with a female friend shortly after the conclusion of the World Cup semi-final match between France and Belgium. He then got into an argument with a man identified only by his family name, Kong, which ultimately led to the police getting called to the scene. When officers arrived, they came upon Udin lying in the street in critical condition after having been stabbed in the chest and back and beaten to a bloody pulp with a bike lock. Udin succumbed to his injuries before he could be transported to the hospital. The police subsequently determined that the young man had been killed by 28-year-old Kong after their row had escalated to violence. CCTV footage of the incident showed Kong crossing the street to confront Udin after he and his companion exited the bar. The police revealed that the man had become enraged because the international student had made light contact with his scooter earlier that night. In June of 2020, Kong was sentenced to death after being convicted of intentional homicide. Number 1. Andre Drakev. In August of 2017, an MMA fighter got into a bare-knuckle street fight with a champion powerlifter in Khabarovsk, Russia. According to eyewitness testimony, 26-year-old Anna Alagvarenov had been taunting professional lifter Andre Drakev about how MMA was the superior test of physical prowess to weightlifting. Drakev ultimately agreed to a fight to settle the dispute, which subsequently took place at a nearby intersection. As was captured on cell phone video, the mixed martial artist at one point delivered a vicious roundhouse kick to Drakev's head, causing him to collapse to the pavement. Alagvarenov then proceeded to bash the powerlifter's head repeatedly as he laid motionless on the ground. The ruthless assault eventually killed Drakev, and Alagvarenov subsequently went on the run. After a manhunt was launched by Russian police, the MMA fighter turned fugitive gave himself up to the authorities and was charged with homicide in connection to Drakev's death. Following a trial that lasted for over a year, Alagvarenov was found guilty and consequently sentenced to 18 years behind bars.
On the afternoon of November the 8th of 2019, a substitute teacher was captured on cell phone video brutally assaulting a special needs student at Lehman High School in Kyle, Texas. The factors that had led to the attack remained unclear, but 32-year-old Tiffany Shadell Langford was shown repeatedly punching the student before throwing her to the floor and stomping on the back of her neck. Langford had started working for the school district in August of that year and was reportedly teaching a Spanish class at the time. As reported by the Hays County Sheriff's Office, the teenage victim was taken to a hospital in the incident's wake. The injuries she sustained from the teacher's forceful blows weren't deemed life-threatening, and she was later sent home. Langford, who'd passed a background check prior to being employed, was arrested on charges of aggravated assault, a second-degree felony, and fired from her position that same day. Number 7. Adrian Ackers. A teacher from Lampeer High School in Illinois was placed on paid leave following his arrest for an altercation with a student that had occurred on September the 19th of 2022. The teenager had reportedly punched 44-year-old Adrian Ackers multiple times in the face following an argument. Ackers retaliated by lifting the student by the legs, taking him down and pinning him to the floor while waiting for the police to arrive at the scene. The team was transported to a local hospital for treatment, but the extent of the injuries he'd sustained in the altercation remained unclear. Ackers was arrested by Springfield police and faced the charge of aggravated battery. He was also believed to have been injured during the fight, as he was shown wearing a neck brace in his processing photo. The teacher made an appearance at Sangamon County Circuit Court and was subsequently released on a recognizance bond. He was banned from contacting the student or anyone from Lampeer, as an investigation into the incident was underway. Number 6. Marston Riley. In the fall of 2018, music teacher Marston Riley was working at Maywood Academy High School in Maywood, a small city southeast of downtown Los Angeles. In November, Riley, who was at the time in his mid-60s, was arrested for attacking a male student. The latter had reportedly thrown a basketball at the teacher and had also cursed at him following an argument about him not wearing his school uniform. As tensions escalated, the teen got in Riley's face and called him a racial slur. Cell phone video showed the teacher swinging wildly at the student. The teen fought back but ended up on his knees with his arms wrapped around the teacher's legs. Riley then repeatedly struck him in the head with his cell phone before the fight was broken up by a security guard and other students. Riley was taken into custody on a charge of causing corporal injury to a child while the student was hospitalized with moderate injuries, from which he fully recovered in the aftermath. Riley was released from jail after posting bond. He received a considerable amount of support from staff and parents as his legal case unfolded, with over $200,000 being raised to cover his bills. In late October of 2019, the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office dropped the charges against Riley. A number of aspects factored into the decision, including his age, lack of a criminal history, and the fact that the incident had forced him into early retirement and his completion of an anger management course. Following the case's dismissal, the former teacher spoke to the media about the fight. He stated that he'd initially remained calm and had asked the student multiple times to leave the classroom, adding, "The less I did, the more violent he got." Riley claimed that the teen's escalating aggressiveness reminded him of another incident in which he'd allegedly been attacked by 3 students, noting, "My thinking at that time was, this ain't gonna happen to me again." Number 5. Xavier Steele. On April the 17th of 2023, a student and a substitute teacher at Rocky Mount High School in North Carolina were both arrested for simple assault following a violent classroom confrontation. Teacher Xavier Steele had reportedly confiscated a female student's phone, which prompted the teen to approach her space behind the teacher's desk, whereupon an argument ensued. It was followed by a physical altercation during which they grappled, and the unnamed student forcefully grabbed at the teacher's hair, as shown in a cell phone video that subsequently went viral. They ended up on the classroom floor with Steele on top of the student. Roughly 72 hours after the incident, Steele, who'd been with the Nash County Public School System for approximately a year, went on Facebook Live to give her account of the classroom brawl. Steele maintained that she'd followed protocol during the incident and that she hadn't initiated the brawl, adding, "That young lady attacked me and she went for blood." She regarded the altercation and others like it as being among the reasons why teachers were leaving the field and stated an intention of doing the same after a career spanning over 2 decades. During the video, which received over 24,000 comments, Steele showed the spot from where her hair had been ripped out of her head during the fight. The teacher concluded, "As much as I love the kids, I cannot put my life or my livelihood in danger anymore." Number 4. Mary Hastings. A geometry teacher at Ozen High School in Beaumont, Texas, was arrested on assault charges in the spring of 2016 after she was caught on video striking a student. As reported by others in the classroom, the male student in question had asked about a grade during the 4th period maths class, which seemingly enraged 63-year-old Mary Hastings. The full context of the argument wasn't made immediately clear, as Hastings was recorded telling the student, "Because you're stopping him from graduating, you idiot." She then pushed papers off the student's desk and struck him 5 times with an open palm. The student asked, "Why did you do that?" To which Hastings replied by mockingly repeating his words back at him. She was arrested that day for assault and was subsequently released on a $2,500 bond. A few of the students who'd witnessed the attack spoke to the media in its wake and described it as being out of character for Hastings. The woman was characterized by multiple accounts as a really cool and caring teacher. Number 3. Akenga Smith. In the spring of 2019, a video went viral on social media of teacher Akenga Smith attacking one of his students at Glen Hills Middle School in Augusta, Georgia. The unnamed teen was reportedly asked to leave the classroom because he was being disrespectful. He refused to do so and proceeded to challenge Smith's authority. In the clip, the teen was seen pushing up against the teacher, who towered over him. Smith then shoved the student into a desk as frantic screams from the others in the classroom were heard in the clip's audio. The student tried to push back but was overpowered and taken to the ground. Smith then picked him up and dragged him in the hallway before the video cut off. Smith was placed on paid administrative leave, and an investigation was launched by the Richmond County Board of Education Administration and the RCBOE Police. Updates indicated that a warrant for Smith was approved, charging the teacher with simple battery. A Change.org petition for the charges against the teacher to be dropped gathered 3,705 signatures in the incident's wake. Number 2. Vivian Nawari. In November of 2022, Spanish teacher Vivian Nawari was taken into custody and charged with second-degree assault and physical child abuse after she'd attacked one of her students at Largo High School in Prince George's County, Maryland. The student, who was reported as being in her late teens, had confronted 36-year-old Nawari because she'd contacted her parents the previous night and complained about her behavior. While following Nawari around the classroom and trying to force a conversation with her, the student stepped on the teacher's foot and bumped into her. According to charging documents, Nawari struck the student several times in the back of the head with a closed fist, kicked her, and then threw her to the ground. The incident was caught on video by other students. Nawari was arrested and placed on administrative leave, pending an investigation. The teenage victim admitted to having stepped on the teacher's foot, but maintained that it had been an accident. Updates from mid-January of 2020 indicated that the charges against Nawari had been dropped, but that the case remained under investigation. Teresa Dudley, president of the County Teachers Union, told a media outlet that Nawari should have never been charged in the first place, stating, "You can look at the video and you can see that the student was clearly the aggressor and was much larger than she was." Number 1. Madison Anthony. In January of 2023, a substitute teacher from Florida was arrested on a child abuse charge after she'd allegedly struck a special needs student with a book. A staffer approached a resource officer at the Champion Elementary School in Volusia County to report that they'd witnessed 25-year-old Madison Anthony attack a student in the exceptional student education classroom. The students in the class reportedly had learning and behavioral disabilities requiring additional school resources. Anthony had reportedly decided to discipline a child she'd seen strike a peer with a book. She told them, "You hit her, I hit you." The teacher then took the book out of their hands, got closer by walking around a table, and made good on her threat. Anthony again warned the student, "What you do to her, I'll do to you." Upon learning about the attack, the student's parents contacted the police and decided to press criminal charges against the educator. Anthony was arrested on a third-degree felony charge of assault and taken to jail. She was reported to have initially attempted to downplay the incident, but ultimately admitted she'd struck the child. Anthony was consequently removed from the school system's list of approved substitutes.
Thanks for watching.